David Martinez woke up at exactly 6:30 a.m., just like every other day. His alarm clock buzzed the same annoying sound it had made for the past 3 years. He rolled over, hit the snooze button, and lay there for exactly 5 minutes before getting up. This was his routine, and he liked it that way. The bathroom mirrors showed him the same face he'd been seeing for 28 years. Dark hair that never wanted to stay flat, brown eyes that his mother always said were kind, and a face that most people would call average. He brushed his teeth for exactly 2 minutes, just like the dentist recommended, and took a quick shower. His closet was organized by color and season. Today was Thursday, which meant his blue button-down shirt and dark jeans. He'd been wearing the same style of clothes to work for years, because it was simple and he never had to think about it. His coworkers probably thought he was boring, but David didn't mind. Boring was safe. The kitchen was small but clean. Everything had its place, and everything was in its place. He made coffee the same way his father had taught him years ago. 2 scoops of ground coffee, fill the machine with water, press the button, and wait. While the coffee brewed, he checked his phone for messages. Nothing important. Never anything important. His apartment was quiet except for the sound of the coffee machine and the distant hum of traffic. Outside, he lived alone and had been for the past 8 months. His last girlfriend, Rachel, had moved out after telling him he was afraid of really living. She said he was like a robot, going through the motions but never really being present. The words had hurt because somewhere deep down, he knew she was right. David poured his coffee into the same blue mug he used every morning. It was a gift from his sister when he graduated college, with a faded logo from his old university. He stood by the window, looking down at the street below, watching people hurry to their jobs and lives. Everyone seemed to know where they were going and why. He envied that. His father had died 2 years ago, heart attack at 55. Right there at his desk at the insurance company, where he worked for 30 years, David had found him when he went to pick him up for their monthly dinner. The image still haunted him. His father slumped over papers and reports, having worked himself to death for a company that replaced him within a week after the funeral. David had made a promise to himself. He would be careful. He would be safe. He wouldn't take risks that could hurt him or the people he cared about. Life was unpredictable enough without adding unnecessary danger to it. The walk to work took exactly 15 minutes. He knew because he'd timed it dozens of times. Past the flower shop that always smelled like roses, past the small park where old men played chess, past the bookstore where he sometimes browsed on weekends but rarely bought anything. The city was waking up around him, but he moved through it like a ghost, there but not really there. His job at the marketing firm was fine. Not exciting. Not terrible. Just fine. He designed brochures and websites for small businesses, and he was good at it. His boss, Mr. Peterson, rarely bothered him as long as he met his deadlines, which he always did. His desk was organized, his computer files were labeled properly, and his work was always finished on time. But sometimes, when he was sitting at his desk working on another boring project, David would catch himself staring out the window and wondering what it would be like to do something different, to travel somewhere he'd never been, to try something he'd never done, to be someone he'd never been. These thoughts scared him because they felt dangerous, like cracks in the wall he'd built around his life. Lunch was always at the same deli 3 blocks from his office. Turkey sandwich, no mustard, a bag of chips, and a bottle of water. The owner, an older man named Tony, knew his order by heart and would start making it the moment David walked through the door. They'd exchange pleasantries about the weather or the local baseball team. Nothing too deep or personal. The afternoon passed slowly, as Thursday afternoons always did. David worked on a website for a local bakery, choosing fonts and colors that would make people want to buy bread and pastries. He was good at understanding what people wanted, what would make them feel comfortable and safe. Maybe that's why his own life felt so predictable. He designed it the same way. He designed websites with everything in its proper place. By 5:30, most of his co-workers were packing up to leave. David usually stayed until 6, not because he had extra work, but because he didn't have anywhere else to be. His evenings were as routine as his days: dinner at home, maybe a movie on Netflix, reading a book until he fell asleep. The walk home was peaceful. The city was settling into its evening rhythm, restaurants filling up with people meeting friends, couples holding hands as they walked, families heading home after long days. David watched it all like a movie, feeling separate from it, like he was behind glass looking out at a world he wasn't quite part of. His apartment felt smaller when he got home, filled with the silence of his solitary life. He heated up leftover Chinese food from the night before and sat at his small kitchen table, eating while reading the news on his phone. The world was full of exciting and terrible things happening to other people in other places. Later, lying in bed, David would sometimes wonder if this was all there was. If he would wake up tomorrow and repeat the same day, and then the next day, and the next, until one day he ended up like his father, alone at a desk with nothing to show for his life but completed projects and paid bills. But then, he would push those thoughts away because thinking about them made his chest feel tight and his breathing shallow. It was easier to focus on tomorrow's schedule, on the comfort of knowing exactly what would happen and when. Routine was safe. Routine was predictable. Routine meant nothing could go wrong. He had no idea that tomorrow, a simple thing like a closed coffee shop would change everything. That one small break in his routine would lead him to a place where he would question everything he thought he knew about himself and what it meant to really live. David fell asleep that night the same way he had for months, planning the next day in his head, making sure everything would go exactly as it always did. He couldn't have imagined that within 24 hours, he would meet someone who would make him forget his own name and remember who he really was. Friday morning started exactly like every other morning. David's alarm buzzed at 6:30, and he went through his usual routine without thinking: shower, brush teeth, blue shirt and jeans, coffee in the kitchen. Everything was normal until he walked up to his regular coffee shop and saw the bright orange sign taped to the door. Closed for renovations. Sorry for the inconvenience. David stood there for a moment, staring at the sign like it was written in a foreign language. This wasn't supposed to happen. Tony's Coffee had been open every single day for the 3 years he'd been coming here. The same cheerful woman behind the counter. The same burnt coffee that somehow tasted perfect. The same corner table where he could sit and check his emails before work. He looked at his watch. 7:15 a.m. He needed coffee, and he needed it now, or his entire day would be thrown off. The thought of facing work without his morning caffeine routine made his stomach tighten with anxiety. David turned around and started walking, hoping to find another coffee shop nearby. The streets looked different when you weren't following your normal path. He'd walked these same blocks for years, but never really noticed the small details. The way the morning light hit the old brick buildings, the sound of people talking as they hurried past, the smell of fresh bread coming from a bakery he'd never seen before. 3 blocks away from his usual route, he spotted a small sign hanging from a building. Luna's Corner was written in flowing script, with a crescent moon painted next to the words. The place looked like someone's living room had been turned into a coffee shop. Mismatched chairs and tables, plants hanging from the ceiling, and soft music drifting out through the open door. David hesitated for a moment. This place looked different, too unpredictable. But he really needed coffee, and he was already running late for work. He took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The inside was even more unusual than the outside. The walls were painted in warm colors, deep oranges, and soft yellows. That made the whole place feel like sunset. Local artwork hung everywhere, and there were bookshelves filled with books that customers could read while they drank their coffee. The air smelled like cinnamon and something else he couldn't identify but liked immediately. Behind the counter, a woman with curly reddish-brown hair was laughing at something her coworker had said. She moved with an energy that was completely different from anyone David had ever seen. Not rushed or stressed, but alive in a way that made him stop and stare. Her hair caught the light streaming through the big front window, and when she turned, to help a customer. David could see she had small tattoos on her arms that looked like they'd been painted with watercolors. She wore a simple green apron over a t-shirt for some band he'd never heard of. And her smile was the kind that made everyone around her smile too. David found himself walking to the counter without really deciding to do it when she looked up at him. Her eyes were warm brown with little flecks of gold. And she had the kind of face that made you want to trust her immediately. "Good morning," she said. And her voice had a slight accent he couldn't place. "What can I get you today?" "Just black coffee," David said, his usual order falling out of his mouth automatically. She tilted her head slightly, studying his face like she was trying to figure out a puzzle. "Just black coffee. That's it?" "That's it," David confirmed, though something about the way she asked made him wonder if he should have ordered something else. "You know what?" she said, reaching for a cup. "I'm going to make you something different. Trust me." Before David could protest, she was already moving, adding things to a cup with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. He watched her work, fascinated by the way she seemed to dance as she made his drink, humming along to the soft music playing in the background. "I'm Luna," she said while she worked, glancing over at him, "and you look like someone who needs more than just black coffee this morning." "I'm David," he said, then added, "and I don't usually drink anything but black coffee." "Well, David," Luna said, putting a lid on his cup, "today's a good day to try something new." She handed him the cup, and their fingers brushed for just a second. David felt something like electricity shoot up his arm, but he told himself it was just static from the dry morning air. "What is it?" he asked, looking at the cup suspiciously. "Cinnamon coffee with a touch of vanilla and just a hint of brown sugar," Luna said. "My grandmother's recipe. She used to say that life's too short for boring coffee." David took a sip, expecting to hate it. He'd been drinking black coffee for years because it was simple and consistent. But the moment the warm liquid hit his tongue, he understood why Luna had been so confident. It was perfect, not too sweet, not too complicated, just right. "Good?" Luna asked, though she was already smiling like she knew the answer. David paused, trying to find the right words. "It's really good. Different, but good." "Different can be good," Luna said, leaning against the counter. "Sometimes the best things happen when we step outside our comfort zones." There was something about the way she said it that made David think she wasn't just talking about coffee. He found himself looking round the cafe, really seeing it for the first time. The customers weren't just getting coffee and leaving. They were talking to each other, reading books, working on laptops, laughing with friends. It felt like a community, like a place where people belonged. "This is your place?" David asked. "For 2 years now," Luna said proudly. "I used to work in an office, wearing suits and sitting in meetings all day. But I wanted to create something that mattered, a place where people could connect." David nodded, though he couldn't imagine leaving a stable job to open a coffee shop. It seemed incredibly risky, the kind of thing that could go wrong in 100 different ways. "What about you?" Luna asked. "What do you do when you're not drinking?" "Experimental coffee. I'm a graphic designer," David said. "Nothing too exciting." "I bet it's more exciting than you think," Luna said. "You create things that people see and respond to. That's pretty amazing." No one had ever described his job as amazing before. David felt a strange warmth in his chest. Different from the coffee, but just as pleasant. "I should probably get to work," David said, checking his watch. He was already later than he'd ever been. But somehow he didn't feel anxious about it. "Of course," Luna said. "But hey, if your regular coffee shop is still closed tomorrow, you know where to find me." David nodded and headed toward the door, but something made him turn back. Luna was already helping another customer, but she looked up and caught his eye. She gave him a small wave, and he felt that strange electricity again. Walking to work, David couldn't stop thinking about Luna's cafe, about the way she looked at him like she could see something he couldn't see himself, about how she'd taken the risk to follow her dream of creating something that mattered, about how different his morning had been just because he'd ordered something besides black coffee. For the first time in years, David found himself looking forward to tomorrow morning, wondering if his regular coffee shop would still be closed, hoping that maybe, just maybe, he'd have a reason to go back to Luna's corner. The next morning, David woke up 5 minutes earlier than usual. He told himself it was just a coincidence, but deep down he knew he was lying. He'd been thinking about Luna's cafe all night, replaying their conversation over and over in his mind. The way she'd smiled when he tasted the cinnamon coffee. The way she looked at him like he was interesting instead of just another customer. His regular coffee shop was still closed. The same orange sign hung on the door. But this time David felt a little flutter of excitement instead of anxiety. He had somewhere else to go now. And maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Luna's corner looked different in the morning light. The sun was streaming through the big windows, making the colorful walls glow like they were lit from within. David could see Luna behind the counter, her curly hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing a different band t-shirt under her green apron. When she saw him walk in, her whole face lit up. "David, you came back. My regular place is still closed," he said, trying to sound casual, but Luna's smile told him she wasn't buying it. "Well, lucky me," she said, already reaching for a cup. "Same as yesterday, actually," David said, surprising himself. "What else would you recommend?" Luna's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Oh, you're feeling adventurous today. I like that." She made him something called a honey lavender latte, explaining as she worked that she got the honey from a local beekeeper and grew the lavender in pots behind the cafe. When David tasted it, he was amazed at how the flavors worked together, sweet and floral, but not overwhelming. "This is incredible," he said, and meant it. "My customers are my test subjects." Luna laughed. "I love experimenting with new combinations. Life's too short for boring drinks." David found himself lingering at the counter instead of rushing off to work. "How did you know I'd like this?" "I don't know," Luna said, wiping down the counter. "I just look at people and try to see what they need. You seem like someone who was ready for something a little different. What else do you see when you look at me?" David asked, then immediately felt embarrassed for asking such a personal question. Luna studied his face for a moment, her expression becoming more serious. "I see someone who's been playing it safe for a long time, someone who's forgotten what it feels like to take risks." Her words hit him like a punch to the chest. "Is it that obvious?" "Only because I used to be the same way," Luna said gently. "I spent 5 years working at a bank, wearing the same boring clothes, eating the same lunch every day. I thought that was what being an adult meant." "What changed?" David asked. "My grandmother died," Luna said simply. She was 93 and had lived the most amazing life. She'd traveled all over the world, learned 4 languages, had 3 great love stories, and started her own business when she was 60. At her funeral, I realized I hadn't done anything worth talking about. David felt a chill run down his spine. He thought about his own father, who'd worked at the same job for 30 years without ever taking a vacation longer than a week. "So, you opened this place?" he asked. "So I opened this place," Luna confirmed. "Best decision I ever made. Scariest too, but that's how you know it's worth doing." David looked around the cafe, seeing it with new eyes. The artwork on the walls, the plants hanging from the ceiling, the way customers seemed genuinely happy to be there. It wasn't just a coffee shop, it was Luna's dream made real. "I've been thinking about writing a book," David said suddenly, then immediately wondered why he'd told her that. He'd never told anyone about his secret dream of being a writer. "What kind of book?" Luna asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. "I don't know. Fiction, maybe. Stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things." David felt his face getting warm. "It's probably stupid." "It's not stupid," Luna said firmly. "What's stopping you?" David thought about it. "I guess I'm afraid it won't be good enough. Then I'll spend all this time working on something that doesn't matter." "You know what's worse than writing a bad book?" Luna asked. "Not writing it at all." For the rest of the week, David found himself going to Luna's corner every morning, each day. She made him something different: a chai latte with cardamom, a cold brew with cinnamon cream, a cappuccino with a heart drawn in the foam. Each day, they talked a little longer, shared a little more. Luna told him about her travels through South America after college, how she learned to make coffee from farmers in Colombia and discovered spices in markets in Peru. She talked about her plans to expand the cafe, maybe at a small stage for local musicians. Turn the empty lot next door into a community garden. David found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone, about how he'd wanted to be a writer since he was a kid, but his father had convinced him to study something practical instead, about how he'd been so afraid of failing that he'd never really tried to succeed at anything that mattered to him. "You know what I love about this place?" David said one morning, gesturing around the cafe. "Everyone here seems so alive, like they're actually living their lives instead of just going through the motions." "That was the whole point," Luna said, refilling his cup. "I wanted to create a space where people could be themselves, where they could slow down and remember what makes them happy. I haven't felt happy in a long time," David admitted. "Until this week." Luna's smile was soft and warm. "Happiness isn't something you find, David. It's something you create." On Friday, Luna asked him to stay after closing to help her with a project. She was painting a mural on the back wall of the cafe, a tree with branches that reached toward the ceiling, its leaves made of words in different languages. "What do the words say?" David asked, dipping his brush in green paint. "They're all words that mean hope in different languages," Luna explained. "I collected them from my customers. Everyone who comes here has a story, a dream, something they're hoping for." They worked in comfortable silence, painting leaves and adding details to the tree. David found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. The simple act of creating something beautiful with his hands felt like coming home. "I used to paint when I was younger," he said, stepping back to admire their work. "What happened to that?" Luna asked. "Life, I guess. College, work, responsibilities. I told myself I didn't have time for hobbies." "Time isn't something you have," Luna said, wiping paint from her hands. "It's something you make." As they cleaned up, David realized he'd been laughing more in the past week than he had in the past year. Luna had a way of making everything seem possible, of making him feel like he was capable of more than he'd ever imagined. "Thank you," he said as they locked up the cafe. "For what?" Luna asked. "For reminding me that there's more to life than just getting by," David said. "I forgot that for a while." Luna smiled and touched his arm gently. "Sometimes we all need reminding." Walking home that night, David felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Excitement about the future. He stopped at a bookstore and bought a notebook, then stayed up until 2 in the morning writing his first short story in a decade. It wasn't perfect, but it was his, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like enough. 2 weeks had passed since David first walked into Luna's corner, and his life had become something he barely recognized. He woke up earlier now, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. The extra time gave him moments to write in his notebook before heading to the cafe, and he filled almost half of it with stories and thoughts that surprised him. His co-workers had started commenting on the change. "You seem different lately," his desk neighbor had said just yesterday. "Happier, maybe?" David had just smiled and changed the subject, but the truth was, he felt like he was waking up from a long sleep. Tuesday evening, Luna had mentioned something about hosting the cafe's first open mic night. "I want to give local artists a chance to share their work," she'd said while making his usual afternoon coffee. "Musicians, poets, storytellers, anyone who has something to say." David had nodded and smiled, but inside, his stomach had twisted with anxiety. The thought of people getting up in front of strangers to share their art both terrified and fascinated him. He'd never been brave enough to show his writing to anyone, not even his sister. "You should come," Luna had said, as if reading his thoughts. "It'll be fun. No pressure to participate. Just come and listen." David had promised he would, though he planned to go home after work as usual. But as 6 o'clock came and went, he found himself walking toward the cafe instead of his apartment. The evening air was cool, and he could see warm light spilling out of Luna's windows onto the sidewalk inside. The cafe had been transformed. The tables and chairs were arranged in a semicircle facing a small area near the back wall where Luna's mural glowed under soft lighting. There were more people than David had ever seen in the space, maybe 30 or 40, all ages, all types. Some looked like artists with paint-stained fingers and vintage clothes. Others looked like regular people who'd just gotten off work. Luna moved through the crowd like a graceful dancer, greeting everyone with genuine warmth, making sure people had drinks and felt welcome. She wore a flowing skirt and a simple top, her hair loose around her shoulders. And every time she laughed, David felt something flutter in his chest. David. She spotted him near the door and hurried over. "You came. I'm so glad. I almost didn't." He admitted, "This isn't really my thing." "What's your thing?" Luna asked, tilting her head with that curious expression he'd come to love. "I don't know," David said, realizing it was true. "I guess I never really figured that out." "Well, tonight might be a good night to start," Luna said, touching his arm gently. "Come on. I'll introduce you to some people." Before David could protest, Luna was leading him through the crowd, introducing him to a musician who taught guitar lessons, a woman who painted portraits of people's pets, a college student who wrote poetry about growing up in the city. Everyone was friendly and welcoming, and David found himself having conversations that went deeper than small talk about the weather. When Luna finally took the small makeshift stage, the room felt quiet. She didn't have a microphone, but her voice carried easily through the intimate space. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her eyes sweeping across the audience. "When I opened this cafe, I had a dream of creating more than just a place to get coffee. I wanted to build a community, a space where people could connect with each other and with the things that make us human." David watched her speak, captivated by her passion and sincerity. She talked about the importance of art in everyday life, about how sharing our stories and dreams with others makes us feel less alone in the world. "Tonight isn't about being perfect," Luna continued. "It's about being brave enough to share a piece of yourself with others. So whether you're performing or just listening, thank you for being part of this moment." The first performer was a teenager with a guitar who sang a song about missing his grandmother. His voice cracked on some of the high notes, but the emotion in his words made David's eyes water. Next came a woman in her 50s who read a poem about starting over after divorce. Then a man who played harmonica and told stories about growing up on a farm. Each person who took the stage was nervous at first, but as they began to share their art, something beautiful happened. The room filled with this warm, supportive energy. People listened with their whole hearts, and when each performance ended, the applause was genuine and encouraging. David found himself completely absorbed in the experience. He'd never been to anything like this before, so intimate, so real, so full of human connection. In his old life, he would have felt awkward and out of place. But here, surrounded by Luna's community, he felt like he belonged. After the last performer finished, Luna returned to the front of the room. "Thank you to everyone who shared tonight, and thank you to everyone who listened. This is what community looks like, supporting each other's dreams and celebrating each other's courage." As people began to clean up and say their goodbyes, David found himself helping stack chairs and collect empty cups. He didn't want the evening to end. Something about being part of this gathering had awakened something in him, a hunger for connection and meaning that he'd been ignoring for years. "What did you think?" Luna asked as they worked together to put the cafe back in order. "It was incredible," David said, and meant it. "I've never seen anything like it. The way everyone supported each other, the way you created this space for people to be vulnerable and authentic. It was beautiful." Luna smiled, but there was something different in her expression, something softer and more personal. "You know what I realized tonight? What? This whole time, I've been trying to create a community. But I think what I really wanted was to find someone who understood what I was trying to do. Someone who could see the beauty in taking risks and being real." David's heart started beating faster. "Luna, I know we've only known each other for 2 weeks, she said, moving closer to him. But I feel like I've been waiting my whole life to meet someone like you. The space between them seemed to shrink, and David found himself studying her face in the soft light, the way her eyes reflected the colors of her mural, the gentle curve of her smile, the way she looked at him like he was the most interesting person in the world. I feel the same way, he whispered, surprised by his own honesty. Luna reached up and touched his face gently, her fingers tracing along his jawline. I've been wanting to do this since the first day you walked in here, she said softly. When she kissed him, it was like nothing David had ever experienced. Not just the physical sensation, though that was incredible, but the emotional impact. It felt like coming home and setting off on an adventure at the same time. Like finding something he'd been looking for his whole life without realizing he was searching. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but as David responded, it deepened. He tasted cinnamon and coffee on her lips, breathed in the scent of her hair, felt the warmth of her body against his. Every thought in his head disappeared except for this moment, this connection, this overwhelming feeling of rightness. When they finally broke apart, David realized he was trembling. Luna's eyes were bright with unshed tears, and she was smiling in a way that made his heart feel like it might burst. Wow, she whispered. Yeah, David agreed, his voice rough with emotion. Wow. They stood there for a moment, holding each other in the quiet cafe, surrounded by the lingering energy of the evening's performances. David felt like he was seeing himself clearly, for the first time in years. Not the careful, controlled person he'd been pretending to be, but someone capable of passion and connection and love. I don't even know who I am anymore, he said quietly. Luna smiled and brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe you're finally becoming who you were always meant to be. 3 months later, David stood in front of his bathroom mirror and hardly recognized the person staring back at him. Same face, same brown eyes, same dark hair that never wanted to cooperate. But something fundamental had changed. The man. The mirror looked alive in a way that the old David never had. His eyes had a brightness that hadn't been there before, and when he smiled, it reached all the way to his soul. His morning routine had completely changed. Instead of rushing through his shower and grabbing whatever clothes were closest, he took time to really wake up. He bought new shirts in colors he'd never tried before, deep greens and warm blues. That, Luna said, brought out his eyes. He'd even let his hair grow a little longer, and somehow it looked better messy than it ever had when he tried to control it. The biggest change was his notebook. What had started as a few scattered thoughts had grown into something real. A collection of stories about ordinary people discovering extraordinary things about themselves. He wrote every morning now, sometimes for just 15 minutes, sometimes for an hour. The words came easier than they ever had before, like someone had unlocked a door inside his mind. His coworkers had definitely noticed the transformation. You're like a different person, his boss had said during his last performance review. Your designs have so much more creativity and energy than before. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. David had wanted to tell him that what he was doing was falling in love, but that seemed too personal to share. Instead, he just smiled and said he was trying to live more authentically. The words had felt strange in his mouth at first, but now they felt natural. The relationship with Luna had grown in ways that surprised him. She didn't just accept his quiet, thoughtful nature, she celebrated it. When he showed her his first completed short story, she'd read it twice, then looked at him with tears in her eyes. This is beautiful, she'd said. You have to share this with other people. I'm not ready for that, David had protested. But Luna had given him that look that meant she could see right through his fear. When will you be ready? She'd asked gently. Next month? Next year? Never? That conversation had led to David signing up for a local writing workshop. The first meeting had been terrifying, sitting in a circle with strangers, sharing his work, out loud, listening to feedback and criticism. But the fear had been worth it. The other writers had understood his stories in ways he hadn't expected, and their encouragement had given him the courage to keep writing. Luna had started inviting him to help with her community projects, The empty lot next to the cafe was slowly becoming the garden she'd dreamed of every weekend. They worked alongside neighbors and customers, planting vegetables and flowers, building raised beds, creating a space where people could grow food and beauty together. I never thought I'd enjoy getting dirt under my fingernails, David had told Luna one Saturday as they planted tomatoes. I never thought I'd fall in love with someone who used to wear the same shirt 3 days in a row. She teased back, bumping his shoulder with hers. The word love had started coming up naturally in their conversations, not in dramatic declarations, but in quiet moments. When Luna brought him coffee in bed on Sunday mornings, when David surprised her with a small painting he made of her mural, when they sat together in the cafe after closing, planning their next community event. His relationship with his family had improved too. His sister had visited from across the country and been amazed by the change in him. "You seem so much happier," she'd said, "so much more like yourself." "I think I'm finally figuring out who that is," David had replied. The hardest part had been dealing with his fear of losing what he'd found. Sometimes, late at night, he'd lie awake worrying that this new version of himself wasn't real, that he'd wake up one day and go back to being the man who was afraid of everything. But Luna had a way of sensing his anxiety and pulling him back to the present moment. "You know what I love about you?" she'd said one evening as they walked through the park near her apartment. "You're not trying to be someone else anymore. You're just you." "I'm still figuring out who that is," David had admitted. "That's the best part." Luna had smiled, squeezing his hand, the discovering. David had started taking salsa dancing lessons at Luna's suggestion. The idea had terrified him at first. He'd never been good at dancing, had always felt awkward and self-conscious. But Luna had insisted it would be fun, and she'd been right. The lessons had taught him to trust his body, to move without overthinking, to let go of his need to control everything. "You're getting good at this," his dance instructor had said after a particularly successful lesson. "You're learning to feel the music instead of just thinking about the steps." The comment had stuck with David because it applied to so much more than dancing. He was learning to feel his life instead of just thinking about it, to trust his instincts instead of always analyzing every decision to death. His writing had evolved too. What had started as a hobby had become something more serious. He'd submitted a story to a local literary magazine and been accepted for publication. When he'd gotten the acceptance email, he called Luna immediately, his voice shaking with excitement. "I'm so proud of you," she'd said, and he could hear the genuine joy in her voice. "This is just the beginning." The story was about a man who forgot his own name and found his true self in the process. It was fiction, but everyone who read it could see the truth underneath. David had started getting messages from readers who said the story had inspired them to make changes in their own lives. "Art has the power to change people," Luna had told him. "That's why it's so important to share it." 6 months after that first kiss, David had worked up the courage to show Luna the novel he'd been writing. It was the longest thing he'd ever written, and the most personal. The story of a man who'd been sleepwalking through his life until he met someone who taught him how to wake up. Luna had read it in one sitting, curled up on her couch while David paced nervously around her apartment. When she finished, she looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "It's beautiful," she said. "But you know what the best part is? It's not really fiction, is it?" David sat down next to her and pulled her into his arms. "No," he said. "It's not. The ending, though," Luna said, wiping her eyes. "The part where he realizes he's been living someone else's life all along, and he finally becomes who he was always meant to be. That's not just your story, David. That's everyone's story." David looked at this woman who had turned his world upside down with a single kiss, who had taught him that being alive meant taking risks and being vulnerable, and choosing love over safety. She was right. It wasn't just his story. It was the story of anyone who'd ever felt lost and found themselves. "Again, I love you," he said, the words coming out naturally, without fear or hesitation. "I love you too," Luna replied, and when she kissed him, it was like that first kiss all over again, electric and overwhelming and perfect. Later that night, as they lay in bed talking about their dreams for the future, David realized he'd completely forgotten about his old life. The man who'd been afraid of everything, who'd hidden behind routines and walls, felt like a stranger now. He couldn't even remember what it felt like to be that person. "Do you ever miss it?" Luna asked softly. "Your old life, I mean, the predictability of it?" David thought about it for a moment. "Sometimes I miss feeling safe," he said honestly. "But I don't miss feeling half alive. I'd rather be scared and awake than comfortable and asleep." "That's the difference between existing and living," Luna said, tracing patterns on his chest with her finger. "You're really living now." David smiled in the darkness, thinking about how much his life had changed since that morning when his regular coffee shop was closed. One small disruption to his routine had led to everything: love, creativity, community, purpose. He found not just Luna, but himself. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" Luna asked. "For helping me remember who I really am," David said. "For showing me that it's never too late to start over." "You did the hard part," Luna said. "You chose to change. I just made good coffee." David laughed softly, pulling her closer. "The best coffee," he agreed, "and the best life." As he drifted off to sleep, David Martinez knew exactly who he was. For the first time in his life, not the man he'd been pretending to be, not the man others expected him to be, but the man he'd always been underneath, someone capable of love and art and courage and joy, someone who deserved to be truly, completely, wonderfully alive.